I was fired in front of 300 doctors, and 4 hours later, the ICU locked itself down. The microphone did that high, stabbing squeal that makes your teeth ache. It echoed through Whitmore Memorial's auditorium like a warning siren nobody wanted to hear. I stood at the edge of the stage, under surgical white lights, watching 300 people in lab coats and tailored suits settle into their seats like they were about to watch a lecture. They were about to watch an execution. Dr. Evelyn Whitmore walked to the podium in a designer blazer that cost more than most nurses made in a week. She smiled like the hospital belonged to her body and blood. In a way, it did. Her father founded the place. Her name was on a wing. Her ego was on every wall. Daniel Mercer, she said into the mic, slow and loud, like she wanted my name to stick to the room. Your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. There it was. The clean shot. No private conversation. No dignity. Just a public display for an audience she thought would clap. I did not flinch. 22 years building clinical systems teaches you how to stand still while people panic. 6 years in a military biomedical unit teaches you how to breathe when everyone else forgets. My palms stayed open at my sides. My jaw stayed loose. Inside, something cold slid into place. Faces turned toward me in waves. Some of the doctors looked angry, like they wanted to say something but did not know how to challenge the founder's daughter. Some looked ashamed. A few administrators looked relieved, which told me exactly how many of them had been whispering in Evelyn's ear. I stepped down from the stage. My shoes made a steady click on the polished floor. Evelyn tracked me with her eyes, enjoying her moment. She had been talking for months about modernization, automation, vendor partnerships, and the kind of buzzwords that make spreadsheets feel brave. 6 months ago, she had leaned into my office doorway like she was already the boss, asking for full administrative access to the intensive care unit network. She wanted master credentials for the ventilator controllers, the patient monitors, and the medication pump hub. I need to understand the architecture, she had said, smiling like it was a compliment. I cannot lead if I cannot touch the core. I had not looked up from my screen. Some cores are not meant to be touched by people who have never bled for them. Her smile had thinned. Her eyes had flashed with that particular kind of hatred that comes from being told no for the first time in your life. Now, she was watching me walk away, like she had finally won. The hallway outside the auditorium smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. That smell had been my life since my wife died in a different hospital, in a different ICU, because a system glitch delayed an alarm by 30 seconds. 30 seconds was the distance between living and not living. I built Whitmore's system to make sure that never happened here. I built it like a bunker, redundancy where it mattered, locks where it mattered, and one final truth hardwired into the bones of it. The intensive care unit would never answer to someone it did not recognize. My phone buzzed as I reached the glass doors. A text from Noah. Dad, are you coming home for dinner? I have that anatomy quiz tomorrow. Noah was 17. He wanted to be a doctor because he saw what medicine could do when it was honest. I stared at his message and felt the sting behind my eyes that I refused to give the building. I typed back, I will be home. Study hard. I pushed through the doors into late afternoon sunlight. The air outside was crisp, almost too clean after hospital air. I took 3 steps down the front stairs. Behind me, somewhere deep in the building, a tiny alarm chirped. It was the kind of sound nobody noticed until it became a scream. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Mercer? A shaky voice said. This is ICU charge. Something is wrong. The monitors just flashed an alert. It says, administrative identity missing. I stopped walking. The city noise faded like someone turned down the volume. Then she whispered, and the ICU doors just locked. If you think that was coincidence, wait until you see what the system had been learning for 22 years. The first thing I hear when I step back into Whitmore Memorial is not screaming. It is silence. The kind that presses against your ears and makes your heartbeat sound too loud. 2 security guards stand frozen at the main entrance, key cards in their hands, swiping again and again against readers that blink red. The emergency lights along the ICU corridor pulse in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not panic, not chaos. Control. Tony Reeves, the ICU charge nurse, spots me at the end of the hall and almost runs. His scrub top is wrinkled, sweat darkening the collar. "Daniel," he says, breath tight. The system locked the unit. Doors sealed. Ventilators switched to autonomous mode. We cannot adjust sedation levels remotely. It will not accept any override. Are patients stable? I ask. That is the crazy part. They are stable. Every monitor is green. It is like the system is saying it does not trust us, but it trusts itself. Of course it does. We round the corner into the ICU control room. The central display spans the wall, usually a calm grid of heart rhythms and oxygen saturation levels. Now there is a banner across the top in calm blue letters: Clinical Authority Unverified, Safeguard Mode Active. Underneath it, in smaller text, Hostile Override Attempt Detected. I glance toward the admin console. Evelyn stands there, in heels that do not belong in an ICU, flanked by two men in dark suits with vendor badges clipped to their jackets. Her arms are crossed, but her fingers are tapping against her sleeve. "You built this to sabotage us," she says the moment she sees me. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the fact that she is the one who pulled the trigger this morning. "I built it to protect patients," I reply. My voice sounds almost bored. That irritates her more than if I had shouted. One of the vendor men clears his throat. "We initiated an integration protocol to migrate ventilator controls to our cloud-based AI module. Your system flagged it as unauthorized. You attempted to route live ventilator commands through an external cloud?" I ask. "It is secure," he snaps. The screen flickers. A new line appears. "External command pathway rejected. Data exfiltration risk identified." Tony lets out a low whistle. It thinks they are trying to pull patient data. Because they are. Evelyn steps closer to the console and slams her palm against the desk. "Reboot the entire ICU cluster. Now." The vendor hesitates. "We already tried." It escalated. As if on cue, the wall display shifts. "Secondary lockdown engaged. Elevator access restricted. ICU isolated." The doors behind us click with a heavy finality. I feel it in my chest, not fear, recognition. I remember standing in a different hospital 15 years ago. I remember watching a monitor freeze while my wife's heart rhythm danced toward chaos. I remember a nurse yelling that the alarm did not trigger in time because the system was updating firmware. I remember holding her hand while machines argued about permissions. I built Whitmore's ICU with one principle carved into it. No executive decision would ever outrank patient survival. 16 ventilators are now fully autonomous, Tony says quietly. It will not let us manually adjust settings unless we authenticate as primary clinical authority. "And who is that?" Evelyn demands, even though she already knows. The screen answers for her. "Biometric verification required. Daniel Mercer." The room goes very still. One of the vendor men mutters, "This is intentional." He embedded himself as a single point of failure. "No," I say. "I embedded accountability." Evelyn's jaw tightens. "Unlock it." "You terminated the primary architect without transition of authority," I say. "The system detected administrative instability. It defaulted to safeguard." "You are enjoying this," she hisses. Am I? I look around the ICU through the glass. Nurses move steadily between beds. Patients breathe in mechanical rhythm. No alarms. No chaos. Just a machine that decided it would rather trust 22 years of internal logic than a boardroom experiment. My phone buzzes again. This time it is Richard Whitmore. I answer and put him on speaker. "Daniel," he says, and for the first time in 2 decades, his voice does not carry certainty. "The Department of Health has called. They received an automated alert from our system about attempted structural override. The governor's office is asking questions." "That would be the hostile override flag," I say. "What do you need?" he asks. There it is. The word need. "I need public reinstatement of clinical systems authority," I say. "Full administrative control. And a formal acknowledgement that the termination was executed without understanding system dependency." Evelyn's head snaps toward her father's voice on the phone. "Dad, do not be quiet," Richard says sharply. The vendor tries one more command. The screen pulses red. Unauthorized command escalation detected. Federal notification queued. Tony swallows. Did it just say federal? Yes, I answer calmly. The system logs integration attempts that risk patient data. It notifies regulators automatically. Evelyn looks at me like she finally understands the depth of what she fired. You planned this, she whispers. I shake my head. I planned for incompetence. The hallway outside fills with new footsteps. Swits. Government badges. A woman with cyber division on her jacket enters the control room and surveys the screen. Who is Daniel Mercer? She asks. I raise my hand slightly. You are coming with us to explain why a hospital ICU just reported a hostile takeover attempt, she says. I look back at the wall display, at the steady green lines, at the quiet proof that the system did not revolt. It defended. Richard's voice comes back through the phone, strained now. Daniel, the governor is involved. I need you back. I meet Evelyn's eyes. I do not come back as an employee, I say, and for the first time that day, she looks afraid. By the time we moved back into the auditorium, the hospital did not feel like a hospital anymore. It felt like a courtroom. 300 staff members sat in the same seats they had filled that morning. Only now, no one whispered. No one checked their phones. They had all seen the alerts. They had all heard the word federal floating through the corridors like smoke. At the front of the room stood a long table. Richard Whitmore sat at the center, shoulders drawn tighter than I had ever seen in 22 years. To his right, a representative from the Department of Health. To his left, a woman from the Federal Cyber Division. Behind them, the big screen displayed the ICU dashboard and live feed. Every monitor line steady, every ventilator stable. And across the top, in calm blue letters, Clinical Authority Unverified. Evelyn stood near the podium again. Only this time, there was no designer confidence in her posture. Her hands were clasped too tightly. Her lipstick had faded. She looked less like a visionary and more like a resident caught cutting corners. Richard leaned into the microphone. This morning, he began, voice gravel rough. A termination decision was made regarding Mr. Daniel Mercer. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That decision, he continued, choosing each word carefully, was executed without a full understanding of the clinical system dependencies within our intensive care unit. Evelyn inhaled sharply beside him, but she did not interrupt. Richard gestured for me to step forward. I walked onto the stage again. Same lights, same floor, different gravity. Evelyn took the microphone. Her voice wavered for half a second before she forced it steady. I terminated Daniel Mercer without understanding the architecture of the ICU safeguard protocols he designed. That decision resulted in automated system lockdown. She swallowed, and I accept responsibility. The room was so quiet I could hear the air vents humming. The cyber division agent nodded once toward me. Proceed. I stepped toward the biometric console positioned beside the large display. It had been wheeled in from the ICU. A small green light pulsed beside the scanner. For a brief second, I saw my reflection in the black glass. 52 years old, lines at the corners of my eyes, a face shaped by long nights and long fights. I thought about my wife again, about the flat line that came too late, about the promise I made standing in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and regret. I placed my palm on the scanner. The screen brightened, creator verified. A soft mechanical click echoed through the building. Somewhere upstairs, I knew the ICU doors had unlocked. Elevators reset. Badge access restored. The display shifted again. Primary clinical authority restored. A collective breath left the room, but I did not remove my hand. There was one more command to enter. I stepped to the keyboard and typed slowly, deliberately, so every camera in the room could capture it. Transfer architectural ownership to Mercer Biomedical Trust. Evelyn turned toward the screen. What are you doing? Correcting an oversight from 22 years ago, I replied. Richard half rose from his chair. Daniel, we can negotiate terms. Ownership transfer requires board acknowledgement, the screen displayed. The Department of Health representative spoke quietly. Given that, Mr. Mercer is the registered architect and sole patent holder of the ICU safeguard infrastructure the hospital operates as a licensed entity. Richard's face drained of color. The agent from Cyber Division folded her arms. Without his license, your ICU cannot legally function. Silence again. Richard lowered himself back into his chair like gravity had increased around him. Acknowledge, he said hoarsely. Evelyn stared at her father. You cannot be serious. If we do not, Richard replied, this hospital shuts down. He pressed the confirmation key on the board console. The screen responded instantly. Ownership transferred. Whitmore Memorial registered as licensed user. A new line appeared beneath it. Monthly licensing agreement initiated. I stepped back from the keyboard. 300 doctors watched as the power in the room shifted in a way no press release could ever hide. I was no longer an employee. I was no longer the obstacle. I was the gatekeeper. Evelyn approached me slowly, close enough that only I could hear her. You orchestrated this, she whispered, anger trembling under the surface. I looked at her calmly. No, I prepared for the day someone would mistake authority for competence. Her shoulders stiffened. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself, I answered. Richard stood again and faced the room. Effective immediately, Daniel Mercer is reinstated as Clinical Systems Director under independent authority. He will oversee all ICU infrastructure operations. The applause began cautiously. Then it built. Nurses first, then physicians. It rolled through the auditorium like relief breaking through a storm. I did not smile. Relief was not victory. It was responsibility. As the room emptied, the Cyber Division agent approached me one last time. You understand, she said, that your safeguard protocols just triggered federal scrutiny of a private vendor. I understand, I replied. And if they attempted data exfiltration, then the system did exactly what it was built to do. She studied me for a long second, then nodded and walked away. Evelyn remained near the stage, staring at the licensing confirmation still glowing behind us. You think this makes you untouchable, she said quietly. I turned toward the ICU live feed on the screen. 16 ventilators breathing in perfect rhythm. This makes the patients untouchable, I said. And for the first time since that morning, the hospital felt like mine again. The hospital did not calm down after the applause. It recalibrated. By sunrise the next morning, Whitmore Memorial was no longer just a private institution with a powerful board. It was a facility under review. 2 federal vehicles idled in the parking structure. The Department of Health occupied a conference room that used to host donor brunches. The vendor's cloud integration servers were disconnected and sealed for forensic analysis, and I was back in the ICU, not behind a podium, not under lights, behind the glass. I walked slowly between the beds, watching the ventilators cycle. Each machine hummed in disciplined rhythm. Sedation levels adjusted automatically based on real-time blood gas analysis. The monitors pulsed green and steady. Autonomous safeguard mode had reverted to supervised authority. My authority. Tony followed me, quieter than usual. Media is outside, he said. They are calling it the Whitmore lockdown. I stopped beside bed 12. A 70-year-old cardiac patient lay still, oxygen mask fogging faintly with every breath. Alive. Stable. Call it whatever they want, I said. The patients did not even know. That was the point. Upstairs, in the executive conference room, Evelyn was facing a very different rhythm. I entered halfway through the federal briefing. The Cyber Division agent stood at the head of the table, a projection screen displaying lines of server traffic logs. These attempts, she said, pointing at highlighted timestamps, originated from the vendor's external cloud node. Data packets were structured to mirror ventilator telemetry, but they included encrypted patient identifiers. Richard's fingers tightened around a glass of water. You are saying they were siphoning data? He asked. We are saying, she replied evenly, that the integration pathway would have granted third-party access to protected health information. Evelyn's face drained slowly. That was not the proposal, she insisted. Their AI platform optimizes ventilator efficiency by routing commands through an external analytics hub, I said calmly, which violates 3 separate patient privacy statutes. The vendor's legal representative cleared his throat. The contract permitted data analytics. Anonymized analytics, the agent corrected. Not live patient streams. Silence again. Evelyn turned toward me. You embedded that safeguard because you did not trust us. I embedded it because I do not trust anyone with live ICU data who is thinking about market share, I answered. Her eyes flickered. For the first time, the fight in her looked smaller. The agent closed her folder. This investigation will continue. For now, the vendor integration is suspended. When the room emptied, Richard remained seated. He looked older than he had 24 hours ago. You could have warned us, he said quietly. I did, I replied. 6 months ago, when she asked for master credentials. He rubbed his temples. I built this hospital to innovate. And I built the ICU to survive innovation, I said. Downstairs, I called Noah. He answered on the first ring. Dad? Is it true? Everyone at school is talking about it. It is true that the ICU is safe, I said. Did you really lock the hospital down? I built a system that locks itself when it senses recklessness. There was a pause on the other end. Then he said, softer, Mom would have liked that. The words hit harder than any boardroom confrontation. I hope so, I replied. That afternoon, the board convened again. Not in panic this time, in calculation. Richard cleared his throat. Daniel, given the circumstances, the board would like to discuss expanding your role. I'm not interested in the chief executive position, I said before he could continue. Evelyn looked up sharply. What I want, I continued, is structural independence. Mercer Clinical Systems will remain the sole architect and oversight authority for ICU infrastructure. Licensing remains in place. All future integrations require my approval. Richard nodded slowly. And in return? In return, I said, you get a system that does not gamble with human lungs. Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice lacked the sharpness from before. And my role? You are a physician, I said. Focus on being one. Her jaw tightened, but she did not argue. By evening, the paperwork was signed. Mercer Clinical Systems, LLC, became the governing technical authority for Whitmore Memorial's critical care network. Monthly licensing fees were formalized at $85,000. Vendor partnerships would undergo third-party audit before implementation. When I returned to the ICU that night, the hallway lights were dimmed. Nurses moved in quiet efficiency. Machines breathed in soft rhythm. I stood at the central console one last time and ran a full system diagnostic. All subsystems stable, all patient vitals nominal, all external pathways secured. The screen displayed a final line. Clinical integrity maintained. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph. Not revenge. Responsibility. Tony leaned against the counter beside me. So that is it? He asked. You win? I looked through the glass at the patients who would never know my name. This was never about winning, I said. It was about making sure nobody ever loses 30 seconds again. Outside the hospital, cameras flashed. Headlines wrote themselves. Stock analysts speculated. Lawyers drafted revisions. Inside the ICU, a machine adjusted airflow by 0.5 liter to keep a man alive through the night. And that was all that mattered. 2 weeks later, the headlines stopped using the word lockdown. They started using the word reform. Whitmore Memorial did not collapse. It did not get sold. It did not burn in scandal. It adjusted, quietly, carefully. The kind of adjustment that only happens when people realize how close they came to losing everything. Evelyn no longer stood at podiums talking about disruption. She was back in scrubs 3 days after the incident, assisting in thoracic surgery. The board reassigned her to clinical research oversight. It was not a demotion on paper, but it was a demotion in ego. The vendor contract was officially terminated. Federal review confirmed what my system had flagged. Attempted live stream telemetry routing through an external analytics node. No charges yet. But investigations move slowly. Systems remember. Mercer Clinical Systems, LLC, became a line item on Whitmore's monthly financial report. $85,000, due on the first of every month. On the first payment day, Richard requested a meeting. Not in the auditorium, not in a boardroom. In my old office, he stood by the window when I walked in, hands behind his back. I underestimated you, he said, without turning around. You underestimated the system, I corrected. He gave a tired smile. Perhaps both. The hospital's stock dipped 10% after the incident. It recovered in 9 days. Donations increased. Public trust, oddly enough, strengthened. People liked knowing there was something in place that refused to bend for executives. I would like you to consider a broader role, Richard said. Regional oversight, expansion to our sister hospitals. I leaned back in the chair I had almost lost. I will expand one thing, I said. Access to rural facilities that cannot afford this infrastructure. He turned toward me fully. At cost? At cost. He studied my face like he was trying to understand a language he never learned. You could leverage this for far more money, he said. I already have enough, I replied. That night, I drove home before sunset. Noah was at the kitchen table, anatomy textbook open, highlighter in his hand. He looked up when I walked in. So, he said carefully, are you famous now? I laughed under my breath. No, I am employed. He hesitated. My counselor called today, and I got in. He tried to stay composed, but his voice cracked. Johns Hopkins. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I sat down across from him. You earned that. We earned that, he corrected quietly. The licensing agreement covered his tuition before the acceptance letter even arrived. I had transferred the first quarter's payment that morning without telling him. You do not need loans, I said. You focus on learning. He looked at me in a way that reminded me painfully of his mother, the same stubborn kindness. You built something that saves people, he said. I want to build something that heals them. Outside our window, the evening sky deepened into blue. Back at the hospital, the ICU hummed steadily through the night. Every ventilator calibrated, every alarm latency tested twice, every integration pathway monitored. 3 months later, the Department of Health published a case study titled Structural Safeguards in Critical Care Infrastructure. My name was listed as lead architect. Whitmore Memorial became a model instead of a cautionary tale. Evelyn requested a private meeting one afternoon. She entered my office without the sharpness she used to carry like perfume. I was wrong, she said simply. I did not respond immediately. I waited. I confused control with leadership, she continued, and I confused speed with progress. That happens, I said. She exhaled slowly. You could have destroyed me. I did not build the ICU to destroy people, I replied. I built it to prevent destruction. She nodded once. I would like to earn back your trust. Earn the nurse's trust, I said. Earn the patient's trust. Mine is secondary. When she left, I watched through the window as she walked down the corridor toward the ICU. Not in heels this time, in practical shoes. Late that evening, I stood alone in the control room again. The central display glowed softly. Lines steady, airflow measured, data secure. I placed my hand briefly against the console, not to authenticate, just to feel the quiet vibration of a system doing its job. Real power is not authority. It is responsibility. 4 hours. That is how long it took for an ICU to lock itself down after I was fired. But it took 22 years to build something that refused to let ego outrank life. If someone tried to replace you with something cheaper, would you walk away? Or would you remind them why you built the foundation?